Hi all, this is Sinqlaison. Welcome to the third class on Making Isk. A quick sound check. Do you all clearly hear me? Good, excellent. And do you all have the document? And here it is in the in-game channel. A link to Google Docs. Thank you, Kaivina, for making that. And I will wait now 1 minute for everybody to get this on their screens. Assuming that was long enough, let me start. Probably most of you, but maybe not all of you, have heard my first two classes on Making Isk. The first one was on trading. The second one was on managing multiple businesses. Those are not really necessary as pre-reading or pre-hearing in order to follow this class. They are slightly helpful, but not really needed. In terms of running this class, I will run through the presentation, I will illustrate it. If you could be so nice to post your questions in the in-game channel and clearly mark them with a Q, capital Q question, and then post your question. I will try to take those on the fly, so don't wait to the end with your questions, but just fire away. Now, then on the document, I introduced myself the last two times, so I will not go into that extensively. You will see a quick description of who I am and what I've been doing in EVE on page 1 of the presentation. There's also a disclaimer at the bottom, which is that I've made many stupid mistakes. So everything I'm telling you, you should take with a grain of salt and just drive from that what you think is useful. Then on the classes, on page 2, you will find an overview of the various topics. So we had the first class on trading in December, the second class on running multiple businesses, for instance manufacturing, invention, other things on December 18, and today it's about friends and enemies, and friends does include the Excel spreadsheet. And the fourth course is really it's an advanced course or a fun course. It's about building Titans, and I will talk about a venture that I started on building Titans myself and which failed miserably. So for those who want to try it, I think it's a useful course to attend. Then on the course of today, friends and enemies. Now the main messages you will find on page 3. I will talk about a couple of things. The first one is how do you deal with enemies? And especially in such a way that you hurt them and that they don't hurt you. And I must say I've again made my share of mistakes there, but will try to share some of the lessons with you. The second part is about having friends. So what type of friends are especially helpful, and especially holers and people write programs and stuff like that are extremely helpful. And the third, but I will go relatively quickly through part B. Part C is much more interesting, which is about Excel. And I will give 4 examples of how you can use Excel in a very simple, straightforward and helpful way to save yourself time and stress, especially if you starts to be slightly more complex than trading in a couple of items. Now, then first on point A, dealing with enemies. Couple of lessons, and I will illustrate that. But the first lesson, the first bullet, still on page 3, is that you should prevent having any enemies. And that means that if you go back to my first class and my second class, what I talked about was, especially in the second class, is select businesses where you have a unique advantage so that you don't have enemies. And I can add the second one, which is also behave nicely to people, because otherwise they could turn into enemies and send you war decks, as I just received one last week from somebody that did not think me particularly nice. And that's obviously a pain in the ass. But if you have gotten to the situation that you have certain enemies, and enemies can, for instance, be guys that are in the same business as you. For instance, you are manufacturing boosters, drugs, and you have only 1 or 2 competitors, it would be very interesting to know their identities and to be able to take them out. Or if you are trading, it would be interesting to know who you are waging your trade war against, and to be able to log in just after they have logged out. Or if you are copying BPCs or manufacturing stuff, it would be great to ruin the supply chain of your competitors. Now, but in order to do that, the first thing you have to know their identity. So that's the first part I'm going to talk about. The second part is then how do you find a mercenary, or you deal with him yourself, but how do you find a mercenary to take out your enemies? And finally, how do you prevent being targeted by others? So basically, how do you make sure that it's a one-way street? You hurt them, they don't hurt you. Now, let's then jump to page 4. Researching your enemies. It takes 3 steps, as you see on page 4. And I will illustrate this by giving you a real-life story about a guy, Tita Tredenaar, who was scamming one of my friends. And it goes in 3 steps. The first step is recognize your competitors. And that can be, for instance, if you are, to give this example, dealing in drugs, you buy and you sell a little bit of your stuff to people that are also dealing in those. And then in your transaction window, you will find the name of the guys that you sold to or you bought from, and depending on what you know of them, they will be your enemies. They are the guys that you're competing with. Then, interestingly, you can verify that, because you can always, if you do a transaction with somebody, you can just stumble upon an odd one. That's not really a competitor, but somebody that bought or sold that item just out of happenstance, because he won it in a mission or something. Therefore, you have to go to their contracts. And if you now open the contracts window in Eve, you go to available contracts. That's the 3rd tab. And then on the left-hand side, somewhere in the middle, you will find something which is called issuer. And there you can type in the name of the person. And then obviously you have to make sure that you set regions, location to all regions, contract to all, and then you just hit the search button on his or her name, and you will find all his outstanding contracts. And then go to the second tab, which is called My Contracts. There, what you will see is your own name, probably under owner. But interestingly, you can also type in the name of your competitor, your enemy, in that same bucket. So try it. And then put the status to finished, because that's the only thing it will allow you to. You can see the finished contracts of all your competitors. So type in the name of a competitor, hit finished, or select finished under status, and then hit the get contracts button, and you will see a complete overview of everything they have bought and sold on the market. And you can then narrow it down. For instance, under contract type, you can narrow it down to couriers, and then as soon as you see finished courier missions set by them, you will know where they manufacture and where they sell. So the contracts window is super helpful in getting a good understanding of where your competitors are. Now, that's one. And how I found the identity of Tita Tredenaar, you will see on the picture on the right hand side, because this friend of mine was scammed in a classical margin trading scam, where he saw a high buy order and somewhat lower sell orders in the same quantity. He bought the stuff from the sellers and tried to sell it to the buyer for a higher price, thinking he would make a safe profit, but it was a margin trading scam, and basically the buy order disappeared the moment he wanted to use it, and he was sitting there with tens of millions, hundreds of millions of worthless stuff. But obviously in his transaction window he could find the name of the person, and that was Tita Tredenaar. He told me the story. Then what did I do? Then I went to step 2, gather information on your enemy. So what I did is I checked the character. And so you'll see the picture on the right hand side, Tita Tradenaar, and I found that Tita Tradenaar is part of a corporation called Sega Enterprises. But that Sega Enterprises, if you hit on it, that's the second picture on the right, is part of an alliance. And that alliance is called, whatever. And in that alliance, it's called it's Striker Extreme Alliance. And within Striker Extreme Alliance, there was another corporation called Striker Extreme Holding. So I got the identity of his altcorp. And what I then did is I went to Eve Intelligence, Eve Intel, or www.eveintel.com, and the same you have in Eve Who, and I got all the names of their corp, which is you can see on the right hand side in the small spreadsheet. I then used locator agents, and for that you need certain standing levels, but there are locator agents, and I explained that I think in one of the previous 2 courses, with which you can find the locations of those people, and you'll also see that in the spreadsheet. And I found out that this guy had a particularly large number of people in the system called Vaira. So I flew out to Vaira, checked his office, found his office, went to the various moons, and found his post, which you can find here on the picture on the bottom. Next thing I still have to do is to hire my mercenary, but my mercenary is at this moment in time particularly busy in the north fighting an enormous war with his titans, and is a little bit too busy to take out Tita Tradenaar. So Tita Tradenaar after this course either is informed by one of you, I hope not, so please don't do that, so please keep it silent, but then I will hire my mercenary to have his POS being destructed. Now, that's my way of dealing with Tita Tradenaar, but there are more ways you can use. For instance, if you are dealing in these drugs, find out where this guy is producing the drugs, destroy his POS. If this guy is a holer, and you are a holer and he's competing with you, find a mercenary to shoot him out of the sky in the neighborhood of Lita, and he will stop holing, or etc, etc, etc. So many things you can do to deal with your enemies. Or if you are a trader, put him under your contacts, and if you go to, if you type in his character, you will find on the right hand side, if you right click, you will have added contacts, and there is one option which is add contact to watch list. That means that every time he logs in and out, you will get a message, you will get a signal. And the moment he logs out, you log in and you change the buy and the sell order. So that's one way of dealing with enemies. Any questions on that? Please post them in the channel. If not, then I will continue to page 5. On page 5, what you will find is a description of how do you find a mercenary. And on the mercenary, there are again 3 steps that you have to take. The first step is that you have to find one. And I made a mistake there in the presentation. It says go to the Merc channel. That's incorrect. It should say go to the Merc contracts channel, which you can find in the illustration on the right hand side. It's called Merc contracts. How do you get there? What you do is you are now looking in your Eve screen also. In the Eve screen, under the chat windows on the right hand side, top right, you will find a small balloon which says open channel window, and if you go there and type in Merc contracts, you will find the Merc contracts channel that you will see the picture of on the right hand side. That's a list of mercenaries that is slightly more reliable than the average set of mercenaries. And there's an example there on the right hand side. That's a guy called Black Camper of the Condemned and Convicted. I worked with him a couple of times. He's really dependable, great guy. Now that's step 1. But you should also then ask friends who've worked with mercenaries. You should check the kill board of the mercenary, ask for references. So there's many ways to find out whether this guy is dependable. I would like to pause there. Quick check. I'm still clearly audible and your questions are coming through? Question mark? Good, good. Then I continue. After you find your mercenary, the second part is how do you negotiate a contract? Now, in order to negotiate a contract, the first and the most important thing is to have clarity on what you want to have done. For instance, in my case, I want the POS of Tita Tradenar in Striker Extreme Holding on Vaira 99 destroyed. And I'm willing to pay 1 billion ISK for that. You negotiate on that one with the guy, and he says 1 billion is good enough for that one because it's a small post and it's not defended, or he wants more money, or he wants less, or he's fine with that, etc., etc. They typically don't want less money, so that was a mistake on my side. And then you go to the third step, which is he starts with the mercenary contract, and important there is how to deal with payment. A normal way is 50% up front and the rest upon delivery against the target. Basically, the POS is destroyed. He has sent you the kill mail and you've flown there and you see that Vaira 99 is empty. Or you pay 100% on delivery, which is not always acceptable to the mercenary because they are afraid that they will be scammed by you. So they destroy it, put a lot of work, and then you don't pay. This might be different, for instance, with a mercenary contract with which you just harass a corporation and you pay by kill mail. In that case, they will probably be happy with a different type of contract, but for post destruction, it's different. And what I also did myself is I also worked with trusted third parties like Darkness for bigger contracts, multiple billions, where I paid the money upfront to Darkness. The Darkness then confirmed to the mercenary that he had the money in escrow, and he released the money after the targets were destroyed. There was a question in the in-game channel by Leonidas. Will you sometimes hire a merc even if it will not be economically advantageous to you? Now, yes, I think Tita Tradenar is a great example. Tita Tradenar has not cost me any money, but I just dislike that type of person. So taking out his POS is obviously something that is not going to benefit me, but I will happily do. But I also use mercenary contracts to my advantage to take out competitors. Then on page 6, obviously what can happen to them also can happen to you, and so you can be targeted by others. And that means that you have to be slightly smart about how you run your business. And to give an example again, is if you are running a business in which you are producing dreadnought BPCs or drugs or anything, then it typically is helpful to organize your business in such a way that you are making sure that your production sites cannot be easily targeted by others. So how to do that? First is organize it as a mafia, cell operations. So meaning don't put all your characters in one corporation, but have them in separate corporations. And I gave you the examples of 6 to 10 members, but it's also at a much smaller scale already helpful. For instance, if you produce drugs, produce them with corporation A and sell them with a person B that's not part of that corporation. And if you have multiple corporations, really make sure that there are no dealings between those corporations, so between your mafia cells. And because what you just noticed, what I did with Tita Tradenar, he left a big trail. And the trail was that his corporation was part of an alliance. And in that alliance there was another corporation. And that way I found out that he had alts that I could find. I would never have been able to get to Striker Holding, Striker Extreme Holding, if it were not for the fact that they were part of the same alliance. So how do you prevent that? So prevent any dealing between those cells. So have private contracts between your corporations only, because private contracts nobody can find. So even what I just showed you on the contracts window, you will find only the public contracts that corporation has finished. But you will never find the private contracts that the corporation set, for instance, between them and one of their alts. Also prevent public courier contracts. So if you are setting up a manufacturing operation, make sure that you set private courier contracts to that location, not public one, because otherwise, unless you don't mind, but otherwise, as soon as you set public contracts, people can find those. And don't move characters between corps, because if you look at corporation history, you can easily find that people have shifted between one corp and the next, and you know the corps are related. Now, and then there are a couple of other measures you can take. For instance, if you open Eve Gate and you go to your profile settings, what you will find is that there are privacy settings, and basically they are set to all your corp mates, and all those with excellent standings to you outside of your corp can see who all your other contacts are. And sometimes you don't want that. So, and already gave an explanation about the second bullet there. So if you are manufacturing using POSes, don't sell your sell orders in the same system. Make sure your headquarter is in a different system, and make sure you sell via a third party, called Jita trader or whatever you call them. And if you are a trader, that's for a manufacturer, but if you are a trader, make sure you're not easily recognizable by not having your buy and sell orders with the same notation always. And I gave this example there of 25,000,007,007, which is that type of notations traders use to save themselves time. Then there's a question of Intana. You mentioned previously that you sold characters. When you are defending yourself, is this not potentially harmful, as it gives somebody else your transaction history and therefore your connections? Yes, that's potentially harmful. Therefore, my sales character, Sinqlaison, is completely unrelated to those corporations that are manufacturing for me. And I deal not directly with them. And secondly, if I sell them, I delete as much as possible information. For instance, I delete all the contacts, I delete all the mails, I delete as much as possible. But obviously, you're right, Intana, I cannot delete the transaction history. Any more questions on not being targeted by others? If not, I will continue to the friends part. So this was the enemies part. On the friends part, there's one other question from Agatis. He says, a bit odd maybe. I've heard a crazy story about somebody who did something more than intel against his enemy. In fact, he used a professional hacker to find his physical location in real life. Then went to his house when he was online flying on his Titan, and he cut his power line down. Now, that is, I would say that's a good joke, but I have not heard that story before, and that goes a little bit beyond what I would advise you guys to do, because this is still a game, I would assume. But anyway, it is a nice, strong story. Then on friends, page 7, an important friend you might have is a holer. And that depends a little bit, obviously, on the size of your business. If you are working on the small size, as I would expect you guys to do in the beginning, it's not so important, because you then still have the time and you don't have the money. But soon, if your business start to grow a little bit, then you will get to become time constrained. And that's also what I talked about in the second class, about managing multiple businesses. And then obviously you have to save yourself time, and having a holer is a good idea. Having a holer, a private holer, is also a good idea for other reasons. And that's what I list on the top of page 7. Because you can have private contracts. Because you can have a public hauling contract, and then you set a courier contract. So if you go to the contracts window, you will see that you can create a contract. The third one is a courier contract, and then under availability you will see a public contract and a private contract. The public contract is default, and the advantage is many more people see it, and you will have probably the cheapest rate. But the alternative is that you click the private one, and then you have to fill in the name of your hauler, the guy that is going to take care of it. And obviously you can't do that without first contacting him or her and agreeing on the terms. But I have a couple of haulers that work for me, and that and with them I've agreed on certain rates per undock and rates per jump, plus also that the amount of collateral they have available for me. Now, so that's a reason for me, because it's stealth. Private contracts cannot be found. For me, stealth reasons are the most important reason to use a hauler, a private hauler. But there are other reasons. For instance, if you want to have stuff to low sec or to 0.0 even, there is Black Frog Logistics, but that's basically the only one. And you might also want to work with friends who take care of the 0.0 jumps. It could also be that there's somebody that you really just trust and you want to work without collateral. Because if you set a courier contract, you can ask for collateral, similar to the value of the stuff you want to transport. But for some haulers, that's obviously, if it's more expensive stuff, that's a big barrier. And therefore you might not be able to get the cheapest hauling company. And if you trust the guy, so you trust this guy to deliver and not renege on your contract, then having a private contract is smart. And then finally, there could be that you want to have stuff transported that doesn't fit one freighter. And the maximum size of a courier contract is one freighter. So roughly 900,000, almost 1 million cubic meter. So sometimes I have stuff which is much bigger to transport. And what I then do is I do an item exchange contract. So again, if you go to contracts, you will see, if you then create contract, you will see item exchange clicked as the default. And you then click private, fill in the name of the guy, and set the contract with whatever items you want to have transported. And obviously you then have to put it either in the message box of your item exchange, or you send them an email saying, I've just sent you a contract for a value of 1 billion, and I want to have it transported from place A to place B, and then please set it back to me as an item exchange contract and add to the collateral also the hauling fee. So that's how I work with item exchange contracts. Then the question is, what do you pay for hauling? There I would advise you to do a little bit of research. So just click on again on the contracts window, go to the third tab, which is called available contracts. There just below contract search you can find buy and sell and courier. Click on courier and then click search, and you will find an enormous amount of contracts, and just by clicking them and researching a little bit, you will find out what people are charging. And what they charge depends on whether it's high sec or low sec. How much cubic meter is it? Do you need a freighter for it, or can you do it in industrials? How much collateral do they have to stump up? And obviously high sec runs that fit in a normal industrial ship and have a relatively low collateral, they will be extremely cheap. And as soon as you get freighter class with for 1 billion of collateral, it will become much more expensive. And the amount I pay, I wrote down there, but I pay a lot. I pay this 2.5 million per undock and half a million per jump, but that's absolutely on the high side. So I've also seen many people that pay much less, but I just like to have one private hauler that immediately takes care of my stuff. Now, and then how to set the contract, I think we extensively discussed this. Then on page, are there any questions on this one? On the working with haulers? If not, then I would like to go to the next one, and this is just more for the fun of it. This is not something I would assume one of you to use anytime soon, but that's working with people that write programs for you. Then, sorry, before I go there, on page 8, there was one question from Inaki. Any specific low-sec holders you recommend personally? Now, I worked a lot with a guy, but he's now out of business, so I've not recently worked with a low-sec holder, but I heard that Black Frog Logistics is a good one, and you can find them in the EVE Forum Sales Want to Sell channel. Now, then on page 8, and Commander Kane, thank you for highlighting my typo. EVE Marketeer is one word. No, those are great public tools, EVE Marketeers and EVE Intel and EVEWho.com for spotting trade opportunities and for intelligence, but sometimes those are not sufficient. And let me give a couple of examples, and just keep them in mind if you progress in industrial life in EVE, of what I'm doing next to that, next to using public tools. So the first one is counterintelligence. I told you about intelligence, so identifying others, but I'm sure that there are other guys that are looking into my corporations and in my person. If they do so, I want to be warned. Because they typically don't do that because they have good intentions. They do that because they have something evil in mind. And I want to be warned. And therefore, with now I cannot reveal how many, but let's say with at least one Intel service that is used by EVE players, I have an agreement that I pay them for the service, that they will immediately send me an email in case I am being researched by somebody else. I pay them for it, and it's very helpful information. It gives me warning time. The second thing which gives me warning time is I had a guy from EVE Marketeer program for me, and I'm sure that he's going to make it a public service soon, a fast notification service, so that I get on my email, on a specified email address, immediately a message if there is a notification in one of my corps. For instance, if they're being war decked, or if post fuel rolls is being depleted, your corp gets a message. That message is then immediately sent to my email, which I see more frequently than my corporations. If I log into my iPad, I can see immediately you have a message, and I find out what the problem is. And if it's fuel, that's no problem. If it's a war deck, yes, that's a problem. And then finally, an example, and I gave the picture on the right hand side is what's currently under construction, is certain corporations have websites, and not all of us are good in building websites, and I have a guy that is programming at this moment in time a website for me for my super capital business. And in order to do that, the third and last on page 8 is I obviously have to write user requirements, which I did on the right, and I pay him 1 billion per hour to program it. No, but as I note, as I said in the of this page, this is for advanced industrialists only, because this is expensive stuff, but still, maybe the fast aggression timer is something that is also useful for you. Then I would like to go to something that is useful for anybody that runs a industrial business, however small that business is, which is to make use of Excel. Now, this is not a training in Excel. What I'm going to do in 4 pages is give 4 illustrations of how I am using Excel to manage a complexity, and to make sure that I'm not stressed by running multiple businesses and multiple accounts and characters and the like. And the first one, that's on page 9, is about how Excel can help you taking care of time-critical events. And I gave a list on the left, for instance, skill queues. So if you have more than one character, you would like to be warned that it's time to log into that character and to add a number of skills to the queue. And you see an example on the right-hand side, and you see the accounts, you see the characters, and you see the time when the skill is ready. And you see colors. And the colors with me mean yellow means that's a time far in the future, orange means that's a time quite near, so be aware that it's coming up, and purple is that's a time in the past. So you should have updated your skill queue already, but you did not. So hurry. Now, that's one example, but there are more. For instance, managing the end of production runs. If you have multiple production runs with multiple characters, you don't want to let them idle at the end. You want to know when they are finished, and you can put that in the Excel spreadsheet. Post-fuel depletion is another one. Managing trade order updates. For instance, I have a certain rhythm with my trade orders. For instance, in areas where I have lots of competition, I want to update them every 3 days or every day maybe. And at areas where I have hardly any competition, I want to update them every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks I get a signal. For instance, Trader 5 should have updated its trade order already. Then there's a question of Nevi asking quite near equals how near in terms of the timing. So the orange for me is 1 day. So I want to know 1 day in advance if something is coming up. Then the question is, how do I get to those colors? And so you type in that you should, for instance, your skill queue ends on January for character 1, ends on January 10th on 3:39 in the morning. But then how does that thing get? So basically, obviously, it helps enormously to see the colors change automatically. That is done in the little blue box on the bottom. You see the illustration of that. It's called conditional formatting in Excel. And what you can do is you can write a formula whereby you say if the cell value is less than now, meaning the day and the time of now plus 1 day, the 1 times AI 66 is basically 1 day. That's a value that equals 1 day. Then turn it to purple. And if it's etc. etc. There, by the way, Nevi, you can see that I just did not tell you the complete truth, because you can check there what I think is near, for instance, but I'm not sure for what this was. This could have been a skill queue, but this could also have been something completely else, because basically what I did here is I say become purple if it's 1 day between now and 1 day, and become orange if it's between 1 day and 1 week. And then you can have another color, for instance red, if it's in the past. But just as an example, but so that you guys know how to program this. Any questions on this? On taking care of time-critical events? If not, then I will move to the next page, which is managing supply chains. Now, it can difficult to have a supply chain. So say you are producing something, a Tech 1 battleship in a space, or you are producing drugs, or you are producing whatever, then you will quickly have a supply chain. Now, and that supply chain you have to manage, otherwise what's going to happen is that the moment you want to press the manufacture button, you will find out that there are not enough minerals. The moment then you want to export minerals to production location, you will find out that you did not buy sufficient minerals in Yita. And the moment that you want to press the sell button for your Tech 1 battleships that you've just produced, you will find out that you had none because you, etc., etc. So you have to operate a supply chain where you buy stuff, transport it, manufacturing it, transport it to your sales location, and put it on sale. Now, in order to manage that, it's helpful to put that in a spreadsheet. And I gave here an example of a slightly complicated business, which is my own business, producing packs of capital components for use with people that produce Titans. But what you will see here is that I take 3 steps. So first is I take a customer order. For instance, somebody wants a pack for a Erebus Titan with a material efficiency 2 level. Now, if that's the case, if you have really good eyes, you can see that he, for instance, need 420 capital armor plates components to produce that one. That's interesting. I put that thing, so I now know how much he needs. So if he puts in an order, I know how much they need. Then I have to manage my production chain. Now, that works as follows. You will find there in the second bucket, which is called Manage the Production Chain, you will find what I have in production, what I have being hauled to YITA, what I have in stock in YITA, and what I have on order from customers. And the customer orders again have this color scheme. And you will see on the color scheme that, for instance, I have sufficient of armor plates to fulfill order number 1, 2, and 3, but I do not have sufficient capacitor batteries, the second item in the list, the second row in the list, to fulfill the second order. And if you then go deeper in the list, the clone fat base, you will see that I'm not even producing enough to fulfill the third order, which is really serious. So that third order will take a month to fulfill. Again, a nice example of how to use colors, automatic coloring in an Excel spreadsheet to warn yourself. And that then brings you to the left-hand side. There you see the purple, meaning, Sinqlaison, you don't have enough clone fat base to fulfill the third Erebus orders, whilst you have idle. No, I'm now reading wrong. It's computer. Sorry. You don't have enough computer system BPCs to fulfill the third order, whilst you have computer system BPOs laying idle in production system 2 and in production system 3. So hurry up and put them into research. Start having them copied. So this is how I basically keep track of my overall production chain. And all the numbers here you should take with a grain of salt. They are made up for the purpose of this exercise. And then the third step is you have to deliver the customer order. Now, if you're producing a Tech 1 battleship, that's really easy because you have produced that ship, and that ship is the order, so you just put it on the market. But in my case, I produce something more complex, so I have a separate spreadsheet with which I sell my component packs to people, which is the bottom part on page 10. Now, this sounds quite complex, and sorry to give you a complex example, but that's because this example I had readily available because I programmed it for my own business. But even for a simpler business, for instance, producing ravens, 4 gems from Jita, you need to calculate the minerals required, you need to have them hauled to your production location in sufficient quantities. You have to set them off. You have to set off the orders, so the production runs, and you have to hold them back to YITA, and you have to put them on sale. And you would like to have some understanding of how that process is working. So that's what's explained on this page. Any questions on this one? If not, then I would like to move to page 11, which is about planning skill training. Now, this is an example for which there are also standard tools on the market, so you can as well use those. I chose to program something myself, very simple. I wrote down I want to train a couple of Armageddon pilots, and what I did is I determined the fitting, the ship and the fitting. I determined based on that what skills they needed and what skill levels I needed to train them to, and I put that in a spreadsheet, including some coloring on what attributes need to be high in order to speed up training time. For instance, the first 2 buckets about science and cybernetics, hull upgrades and the like require high memory and high intelligence. Dark green. So you train them first in combination also with the engineering ones that also require memory and intelligence. And then you do a neural remap and you produce the light green and do your final neural remap and you do the pink part. So that's the fastest way. But as I said, there are other tools on the market with which you can plan this. I just like to have this available. There's a question from Aminar. He says, how do you update the data in your spreadsheets? Now, to give you an example. So if you go back to C1, that's page 9, you will see the timing that a skill is ready. So the moment that I set off a new skill queue and I hit apply, the Eve calculates for me. You can find it in the skill queue. So if you go to your character and you open training queue, you will see, for instance, at this moment in time, that my next skill will be ready in 15 days, 18 hours, and 4 minutes. And then what I did is I programmed one or two extremely simple, small thing on my spreadsheet in which I filled in 15 hours, 15 days, 18 hours, 4 minutes, and which then adds that to now and calculates the end time. For instance, February 2nd this year on 3 o'clock in the morning. And that time I then manually input in my spreadsheet. So the place where it now says, for instance, account 1, character 1 on page 9, ready on 10th of January, I will fill in the new time and it will become yellow because it's far in the future. A couple of days in advance it will become orange and the day itself it will become purple, and I know that I have to update the skill queue. Next question from Hyperion. Is that because you want a self-contained operation depending on no third-party tools or simple preference? That question of Hyperion is about C3, planning my skill training. And it is because I would like to understand what I'm doing. That's always so. I know that there are those skill training programs available, and they might be very good. But I just want to understand a little bit what I'm doing so that I can start playing around with it. Because not all the things that I want to do are available in standard tools. Now, maybe for skill training that is the case, but I'm just married to Excel, so it's easier for me. But many things I would like to do, for instance, what you saw on the previous page, I'm managing my complete supply chain for the BPC packs, or what I'm going to talk about in class number 4, Titan production. For those, there are no you need spreadsheets, but there are no spreadsheets available, so you have to build them yourself. And then finally, nagging in the back of my mind is always what are those guys going to do with my data? Now, I just happen to know that guy from Eve Marketeer, and there is not a more reliable person on earth, but many of the others, I just don't know what they will do with the data, and they might be tempted to research a little bit what I'm doing because evidently that makes some money. So therefore, again, for stealth reasons, prefers to be self-contained. So that was your answer, Hyperion. Then on the fourth and final example, which is about evaluating investment opportunities. So if you start out on Eve, I talked a lot about in the first course about trading. In the second, I talked about other businesses. But you have lots of choices. And the question is, what are you going to spend your scarce time and your scarce ISK on? And in order to determine that, it helps to build simple spreadsheets in order to do some calculations. For instance, a friend of mine at one moment in time thought, should I not start producing item X? And what we did is we built a simple spreadsheet in order to calculate whether it made any sense for him, and it turned out that the payback time was very, very long on his investment. So don't do it. Now, how do you build such a spreadsheet? And I gave an example on page 12. So what I do is if I evaluate investment opportunities, I look at many things. That goes back to the second class where I talked about especially, does it have high entry barriers? So do I have a lot of competition, or is it basically my own market, which is obviously preferable? But apart from that, you also have to think a little bit about what's the return on your investment, because you have a limited amount of money available. So you can buy all kind of nice BPOs, Tech 1 BPOs, Tech 2 BPOs, you have to buy minerals, you have to buy many things, you have then to produce the ships or the items, you have to put them on the market, that all costs money. And the more profitable it is and the faster you get your money back, the better. Now, for instance, a Tech 2 BPO currently takes something like 7 or 8 years to pay back. And there's, by the way, also a public tool with which you can evaluate that. That's called EVI.com. I forgot to mention that on page 12. But again, I don't completely trust that. I don't know 100% certain whether all the mineral costs and the like are updated. Therefore, I in the past already built some own tools. And that's an example here. So how does it work? In the meantime, when I tell this story, can one of you find the link to EVI? I believe it's www.evi.com without a dash in between. Now, so what I do is the following. I will, thanks Intana, I will check the sales price of an item, and I will typically take YITA for that, because because YITA is typically the lowest sales price. So I know that at least I get that amount of money. Then I subtract from that the production cost. And how do you know the production cost? No, you basically take the BPO, you go to the bill of materials, you see the amount of materials you need, you research the cost of those materials. So again, go to YITA, look at the sales orders and find out what you can buy it for. So then you know your profit margin. Then you multiply that by the number of items you can produce in 1 year. Now, if you wonder where to find that, again, go to the market, select somewhere a BPO. Let me do that now. And if you then look at the BPO, you will see under attributes, the first tab, you will find the manufacturing time. And there are two. It's the standard manufacturing time and the manufacturing time for you, which typically is a little bit faster if you have skills trained, like we discussed in the previous class. And then if you know the time it takes, for instance, 3 hours and 12 minutes, you just take the length of a complete year, 8,760 or something hours, and divide it by the actual production time per piece. You know how many items you can produce. Then you basically know your profit for the whole year, and you divide that number by the cost of the BPO. And what you can then find is that certain BPOs take 5 years to pay back, other 8 years, and some will never ever pay back because people are putting them on sale because the item has been nerfed, because they know that you can't make any money with it and they just want to get rid of it. So prevent being scammed, always make those type of calculations. So those were 4 examples of how I am using Excel. And this list is not exhaustive. I use it also for other things. I use it, for instance, for calculating the fitting of a POS. I use it to keep track of my assets. So where are my ships, who has them, stuff like that. So you can use it for many things. And if you would look at my spreadsheets, they don't look particularly nice. They look a little bit chaotic, but they work for me. And they help me manage all those timers, supply chains, look at opportunities, etc., etc. So I hope that brings to life a little bit how you can use Excel without actually training you to use Excel, which is a completely different matter. Any questions on that? A question from Jurt on probably the fourth part, evaluating investment opportunities. He asks, how often do you update the prices on items? Now, if I make a large investment, I update all the items. All the items for that BPO. For instance, if I would want to buy an Absolution BPO, if you look at this at page 12, you will see that antimatter reactor units go into it. So I would like to know what's the current price of that one. The previous time I looked at it was 54,000 or 64,000. What is it currently? But the second item, armor kinetic hardeners, are not used in the Absolution, so I would not check it. I would leave it be. And that way I can make sure that I limit the amount of time I have to spend on researching this Absolution investment opportunity. There was the question of Farish Sedo. Are there open source alternatives to Excel? No, the answers are already given by others. Open Office, Google Docs, so evidently they are there. I've not used them, but they obviously if you don't get them from your employer or don't have them, or if you don't have Office, then they are great alternatives. That was Excel. That also concludes this class. 1 minute before time. That's pure coincidence because I failed to look at the time for the past hour. So basically what we have discussed in this class is enemies. How do you take care of them, but also how do you prevent being their target. Second is how do you work with holders, and for the advanced and for the fun part, how do you also work with custom programmers, and especially how you work with Excel, because without Excel you can't get beyond a simple trading business. So as soon as you start to do something more complex and more profitable, you will need it. Excel and its open source alternatives. So that concludes it. Thank you very much. Any remaining questions? And in the next minute I can still answer. Otherwise we call it quits. Good guys, thank you very much for attending. And Cromwell, no, I don't publish my Excel docs. Sorry about it.